Hello, dramatists. Now that we've learned about the new developments in Roman theater space for Roman comedy, tragedy, and other performance genres in the late Republic, and now that we're reading our first tragic script for next week, it's time to think about details like the costumes and masks of Roman tragedy, which have a lot in common with the costumes and masks of Roman comedy, but with a few new additions and exceptions. So first, we'll start with masks. The expression of the tragic mask was gloomy and often pretty fierce, as you can see from this example. So this does not look like a happy individual. They have a downturned mouth. They have wide eyes, although remember those eyes would probably be hollow so that the actor could see. The mouth was opened wide, much like the masks of comedy, to give a clear outlet to the actor's voice with the same projection technology and made of the same materials. Like comic masks also, you can see that these masks are larger than life. But tragic masks seem designed to have been even more elongated by something that's called the onkos. And you can see that phrase here. It's a word taken from Greek. So it's another way in which Roman tragic vocabulary is taken from the Greek tragic vocabulary. And it refers to this area of the mask, a sort of elongated shape on the forehead that I like to say resembles an egg. Sometimes it has hair on top of it here. You can see curls. Sometimes it's just large and has a crown. Sometimes nothing. It's just an elongated egg-shaped head called the onkos. The size of the onkos is often thought to determine the social status, meaning the political power of the character. So tyrants can have a large onkos, and people in reduced circumstances, so characters who have been exiled or characters who have been enslaved, have smaller ones. But there is also evidence that characters who will gain power over the course of the tragedy might have a large onkos from the beginning, giving that away. So we can think of this as a way, the size of the onkos, as a way to shine a spotlight through masks on key characters. Remember, there are no spotlights in ancient Rome. So this is one way to visually mark a character as interesting. And we can see in this Pompeian fresco that we have one character that has a hat, but if we actually look at their mask, their onkos doesn't seem to be particularly big. Whereas the other character, also with a hat, seems to have a very large onkos akin to that first tragic mask that we saw. So she is probably an important character. And we can see also she's holding a baby here. So she's probably one of the main characters of the play. Here we can see a rather shortened onkos. So this is probably a mid-level character, a middling character. And here again, a larger one with these rows of curls. So it's a way of making the face bigger, more elongated, more pronounced to the audience, giving them visual cues. I've put a handout from our friend Pollux, from whom we learned some things about comic masks, up on Sakai for our Medea week, if you'd like to follow up. And you can see throughout that he's very interested in the way the onkos communicates information about the social status and power of the actor of the character whose actor is wearing it. But next we want to get to one of my favorite things about Roman tragic costuming, and that is the name of Roman tragedy. So Roman comedy in Latin was called a fabula palliata, and that literally just means a play where people wear pallas, fabula palliata, and the palla was the main costume of comedy. So when the Romans call tragedy fabula cothurna, what are they possibly referring to? What does that mean? Is that a style of dress? No, it is referring to the shoes, the cothurnae. Here are some reproductions of the shoes. And here is a little statuette of an actor in a tragedy where you can see they have the mask with the high onkos, but you can also see that they have these platform shoes. So that means that characters in tragedy are wearing these high shoes. They're not always visible in the costumes. Sometimes the costumes can be long enough, but it means that they look larger than life. They look bigger than the average person. So it's not just the mask that's larger than life, it's also the stature of the individual that's larger than life. And as a very clumsy person, I have to say, I would never have made it as a tragic actor because being able to walk around in all of these things seems like it would be challenging, but we don't have any evidence that people walked in a stilted way or something like that. So if you see people walking around in platform shoes, you can think of them as tragic actors, a fabula cothurna. But what about the rest? We've talked about the head, we've talked about the feet. What are some other things about tragic costumes? Like comedy, tragedies based on Greek subjects, and so also had Greek dress. But because the characters tended to be more elite, we've talked about how they're royal or divine, the type of dress was fancier. instead of a palla, which was sort of an average level outfit that mid-level people would be wearing in real life. Tragic characters had something called a chiton, and here's the word here, a chiton, sometimes pronounced chiton, which, like a palla, was largely a piece of fabric. You can see here, bedsheet fashion at its best. We can see that this is being made into different styles of dress, sort of a one-shoulder dealie here, a whole outfit here, and then two different styles for women that were made with this chiton. And what's the difference? Since it can also be long or short, it tends to have been made of fancier fabric. It tends to have more fabric involved, so it can drape more interestingly. And generally, it just looked more visually sophisticated. Over the chiton would go a cloak, either a chlamys, like we've seen before, a short traveling cloak, or more commonly a himation, which just means large cloak, and it actually comes from the Greek word for winter. And this cloak could have elaborate borders. You can see this lady is rocking some beautiful borders that are here that could either be done through embroidery or different kinds of thread. We're told that they could be gilded, that they could have elaborate patterns. So basically the bling in the costume was coming from the himation. And you can see here, we have some man who doesn't seem to be wearing very much of a chiton below, has draped this around himself in a way that allows him to move. This young man is in the process of draping it around himself in a different way. And for the woman, it becomes almost an entirely separate garment over her chiton, and she can put it in various ways and use various brooches and things to hold it together. So often there would be pins that would be holding this to your body in different ways. But we're told that the colors of tragedy were vibrant. The Greek word, and thus the Latin word, is poikilia, which means multicolored, embroidered, textured. It's implying patterns. It's implying lots of busyness. So we can see here all sorts of characters with vibrant himation, but also with things in their chiton and their himation that are already colored in different ways. These nice ladies are admiring their own fashion in the mirror. This is kind of a funny 1920s version of this dress that we see here illustrated. But I want you to just note the variety of the colors and the variety of the ways things can be draped. So even though it's just a simple piece of cloth, it's actually something that can be quite visually compelling. You can have a lot of variety in the costumes. And Pollux, our friend who talks about masks, also talks about tragic costumes. So he tells us that Atreus's and Agamemnon's, by which he means tyrants, wear a purple red himation over their chiton. So probably this man here is a tragic tyrant in that. So look at how bright and red and visible he would be to the audience. Pollux also tells us that those in distress wore dirty white clothes, especially exiles, or gray or black or bluish gray, some even dressed in rags. So if your clothing was torn and tattered, it visually communicated to the audience that you were in social disgrace. So you were either an exiled person, something had happened to you, you had a reduced status. So you can imagine if someone is, say, dressed in rags, but they have a very large onkos on their mask, the audience would already know you are in reduced circumstances, but you are going to be raised to great circumstances by the end of this play. You're going to have achieved something. So I like to say poikilia is the way that the Romans make it fashion, as opposed to just making it a bedsheet. Pollux also tells us that queens wore purple chitons for royalty with white overgarments and purple slashes. And then he goes on to say that women in distress have dingy gray garments or black garments with a blue-gray overlay. Now, we don't necessarily need to say that Pollux is providing a code, that everything was this close and this detailed, but what you can see from his language is that clothes communicated a lot about the status and the story trajectory of the character. And that with all the colors that were involved and that were optional, someone could actually do quite a lot, that the visual part of tragedy would be quite exciting for the audience to read. So as we read our tragic scripts, I want us to think about how these vibrant and elaborate costumes could help the audience follow the story, where they could add irony or suspense, where they could add visual interest in this lavish new world of permanent theaters and spectacles. And we're going to start playing that game a little with our first tragedy known as Medea.